The knock came just after 9 at night. Ethan Cole wasn't expecting anyone. Not on a Tuesday. Not when his 7-year-old daughter was already asleep on the couch with a math worksheet sliding off her lap and a half-finished bowl of cereal drying on the coffee table. He opened the door in sweatpants and a worn-out college t-shirt, and found his CEO standing on his porch in heels, holding a thin leather folder, her expression tight enough to split glass. "You're fired." She didn't blink when she said it, and for a long second neither did he. "Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, your city or country, and if stories like this move you, consider liking and subscribing to Prime Black Stories. Now settle in, because this one begins with a knock that changed everything. Ethan Cole had built his life around containment. Contain the bills, contain the exhaustion, contain the parts of himself that once expected more. At 36, he moved carefully through the world, not timid, just measured. The kind of man who chose his words before speaking and double-checked the stove before leaving the apartment. The kind of man who didn't gamble with risk because he couldn't afford to lose. His daughter Leela was the center of that restraint. Everything he did ran through the quiet filter of, will this affect her? The apartment was small but steady. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom with a leaky faucet he kept meaning to fix himself. Leela's drawings taped neatly to the refrigerator with matching magnets. Shoes lined up against the wall instead of scattered. A schedule taped inside the pantry door, school pickup, homework time, grocery budget, rent date. Structure was safety, and his job was the foundation under all of it. He worked as a senior financial analyst at Vailcrest Dynamics, a fast-growing logistics tech company headquartered downtown. The building itself was all glass and steel, designed to reflect confidence back at the city. Inside, it hummed with ambition, and at the top of it all was Adriana Vail, 39, CEO, founder, majority shareholder, sharp-minded. Controlled, impossibly composed. Ethan didn't think about her outside of meetings. That was intentional. He had joined Vailcrest 3 years earlier, right after his divorce was finalized. His ex-wife had moved across the country with someone she'd met during a marketing conference. Leela stayed with him. The decision had been mutual, though not painless. He didn't talk about it much. At work, he kept his head down and delivered numbers that spoke clearly. Revenue forecasts, cost-saving structures, risk analysis models. He was the person executives called when projections didn't add up, and Adriana noticed. At first, it was professional. She requested his presence in strategy meetings typically reserved for department heads. She asked for his input directly, not filtered through managers. She listened when he spoke, really listened, not the distracted kind of executive nodding. Other employees noticed too. "Careful," his colleague Marcus once muttered over coffee. "You're becoming her favorite." Ethan had shrugged. "I'm just doing my job." Marcus raised a brow. "That's how it starts." Ethan dismissed it. He wasn't interested in office politics, and he definitely wasn't interested in becoming a storyline. Adriana Vail had a reputation, not scandalous, just distant. She wasn't known to mix personal with professional. She didn't attend office happy hours. She left networking galas early. She kept her private life exactly that. So when she began lingering after meetings to ask Ethan about his perspective in more depth, he interpreted it as efficiency. When she remembered that Leela had a piano recital and asked how it went, he assumed she was just good with details. When she moved him into a newly created strategic advisory role that reported directly to her, bypassing layers of management, he believed it was merit-based advancement. Which it was. But it wasn't only that. The first time something felt different was during a late-night quarterly review. The office had thinned out. Most lights were off. Ethan had stayed because he needed to finalize variance reports before the board meeting. Adriana had stepped into his glass-walled office without knocking. "You're still here," she said. "So are you." She gave a small half-smile. "Comes with the title." He nodded toward his screen. "Comes with being thorough." She leaned against the edge of his desk, not inappropriate, just closer than usual. "You don't ever seem tired," she observed. "I am," he said plainly. "I just don't have the luxury of showing it." Her eyes held on that a moment longer than professional courtesy required. "Is that about work?" she asked quietly. "Or about being a father?" He hesitated. Most executives didn't ask questions like that, not sincerely. "It's about both," he said. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but dense. Adriana straightened first. Don't burn yourself out, Ethan. I need you clear-headed. I need you. The phrase lodged somewhere he didn't examine. He went home that night unsettled. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because something had shifted. He told himself it was projection. He'd been alone long enough that even basic attention could feel amplified. He ignored it. Weeks passed. Their working relationship deepened. Adriana began looping him into early-stage decisions before they reached the executive team. She valued his caution, his refusal to overpromise, his ability to say no without aggression. "You're not impressed by power," she once told him. "I've seen what it costs," he replied. She studied him carefully after that. Rumors started. Nothing explicit, just sideways glances. Conversations that paused when he entered the break room. He refused to engage. He left the office promptly at 5:30 unless there was a genuine emergency. He declined invitations that blurred lines. He avoided being alone with her longer than necessary. Not because he distrusted her, because he distrusted perception. A black single dad rising quickly under a powerful white CEO. The narrative would write itself. He couldn't risk Leela's stability for something as fragile as office speculation. Adriana noticed the distance. One afternoon, she called him into her office. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline behind her. She didn't sit behind the desk this time. She sat on the small couch near the window. "Close the door," she said. He did. "You've been avoiding me." He blinked. "I don't think that's accurate." She held his gaze. "You leave meetings the second they end. You redirect conversations back to email. You've declined dinner with the board twice when I specifically asked you to attend. That's not avoidance. That's boundaries." The word hung heavy, her jaw tightened slightly. "You think I don't understand boundaries? I think you're my boss," he said evenly, "and I need to protect that dynamic." Her expression shifted, hurt, then guarded. "Protect it from what?" "From misinterpretation." She stood slowly. "You think I would compromise your position? I think people would assume you did." Silence stretched between them again, this one sharp. "You're very careful," she said finally. "I have to be. For your daughter." "Yes," she looked away first. "You can go," she said. After that, things cooled, not dramatically, just subtly. Meetings became more formal, emails shorter. Decisions filtered through the CFO instead of directly through Ethan. He told himself it was better this way. Cleaner. Safer. But he missed the conversations. The rare moments when Adriana let her composure slip and spoke about the weight of leading thousands of employees. The quiet honesty in her voice when she admitted she sometimes felt like she had no one she could trust fully. He understood that kind of isolation. But understanding didn't mean crossing lines. And then came the acquisition proposal. A major competitor offered a buyout, lucrative, fast-moving, and risky. The board leaned toward accepting. It would triple shareholder value almost overnight. Adriana hesitated. She asked Ethan to run independent risk assessments. He worked through nights. Ran projections, stress-tested scenarios. The numbers didn't lie. The acquisition would likely strip departments, relocate operations, and destabilize mid-level staff. Short-term profit, long-term erosion. He presented his findings in the boardroom. "This is unsustainable," he concluded calmly. "Within 5 years, you'll lose operational cohesion." Board members exchanged looks. Adriana remained unreadable. After the meeting, she asked him to stay. "You realize," she said quietly, "that if this deal falls through, the board will blame me." "I know, and they'll blame you too." "I'm aware," she studied him. "Why risk that?" "Because it's the right analysis. Not because it protects your vision, not because I care about what happens to you." He didn't say those parts. Her voice softened. "You could have told me this privately." "I did," he replied gently. "You asked me to present honestly." She looked almost proud. The board delayed the vote. Tension thickened across the company, and that's when the rumors shifted. Instead of favoritism, whispers became accusations of influence. "She's tanking the deal because of him. He's manipulating projections. He's overstepping." Ethan felt it. Colleagues who once joked with him now kept distance. Marcus cornered him one afternoon. "You're in dangerous territory." "I'm doing my job." "Yeah," Marcus said quietly, "but you're doing it close to her." That night, Adriana sent him a short message. "Come by my office before you leave." He hesitated, then went. She stood by the window again, city lights reflecting off the glass. "They're questioning your integrity," she said without turning around. "I figured. You don't seem angry. I've been doubted before." She turned then, stepping closer than she had in weeks. "I won't let them undermine you. That's not your job. It is when it's because of me. The air shifted again. He stepped back slightly. This is exactly why I've kept distance. Her face fell. You think I'm a liability. I think this dynamic is complicated. She let out a sharp breath. You're not just my analyst, Ethan, he swallowed. Then what am I? The question hovered, dangerous, intimate. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the leather folder on her desk. Inside was a printed termination notice, his name at the top. He stared at it. What is this? The board demanded accountability, she said quietly. They believe your projections were biased. They weren't. I know. Then why? Because if I defend you publicly, it confirms everything they suspect. Silence crashed between them. I thought you trusted me, he said, her voice dropped. I do. Then why am I holding this? Her eyes glistened, not with weakness but conflict. Because sometimes protecting something means letting it go. He felt something fracture inside him. You're firing me to protect yourself. I'm firing you to protect you. That's not your choice to make. She stepped closer again. If this acquisition collapses, the board will need someone to blame. They're prepared to make you that person. So instead, you're doing it quietly. Yes. His chest tightened. And what happens to me, to my daughter? Do you have a protection plan for that? Her composure cracked just slightly. I thought you'd understand. I understand numbers, he said evenly. This doesn't add up. He left without shaking her hand. Without saying goodbye, he drove home in silence, the termination letter folded on the passenger seat. He didn't tell Leela that night. He couldn't. And the next evening, just after 9, there was a knock at his door. He opened it, and Adriana Vale stood there, not in her CEO armor, not composed. You're fired, she repeated. But this time, her voice shook. And he realized this wasn't the end of a job. It was the beginning of something neither of them had handled correctly. When Ethan closed the door that night, he didn't lock it immediately. He stood there for a moment, palm flat against the wood, listening to the quiet echo of Adriana's heels fading down the hallway of his apartment building. He hadn't invited her in. She hadn't asked. That alone said more than either of them had managed to say upstairs in her office. Leela shifted on the couch behind him, half awake. Daddy, he turned, smoothing his face before she could read it. Yeah, Bug. Who was that? Work, he said gently. Go back to sleep. She studied him for a second longer than most 7-year-olds would. Leela had always been observant. Divorce does that to kids. They learn the micro-expressions adults think they're hiding. You're not in trouble, are you? She asked softly. The question landed harder than Adriana's words. He crossed the room and knelt beside her. No, I'm not in trouble. It wasn't technically a lie. He brushed her hair back and waited until her breathing evened out again. Only then did he pick up the termination letter from the kitchen counter. He read it a second time. Performance misalignment with strategic direction. Irreconcilable differences in risk interpretation. Effective immediately. Corporate language was clean. Sterile. It didn't mention the late-night strategy sessions. Or the way Adriana had once called him at 6:15 a.m. just to ask if she was overreacting to a supplier contract clause. It didn't mention the quiet trust that had grown in the spaces between formal reports. It definitely didn't mention whatever had been building beneath it. He folded the letter again and placed it inside a drawer instead of throwing it away. Sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, the office announcement went out before he could decide whether to tell anyone himself. By 9:10 a.m., his phone was buzzing. Marcus called first. Tell me this isn't real. It's real. A pause. Did you do something? No, Marcus exhaled. They're saying you tried to tank the acquisition. They can say whatever they want. You going to fight it? Ethan looked around his small kitchen. Leela was at the table eating toast, swinging her legs. I don't know, he said. He didn't call Adriana, he didn't text. If she wanted distance, he would give it to her fully. 3 days passed. Recruiters who once returned his emails within minutes were suddenly cautious. We're just monitoring the situation, one told him diplomatically. Monitoring. Translation, waiting to see if he was radioactive. He kept routines intact. School drop-offs, homework supervision, grocery budgeting, stability was a performance too. On the 4th day, Leela noticed. You're home a lot, she said after school, setting her backpack down. Yeah. Did you quit? He blinked. Why would you think that? You don't wear your office shoes. He almost smiled, observant. I'm between projects, he said. She considered that. Is that good? It can be. She nodded, accepting the answer for now. But that night after she fell asleep, he allowed himself to sit in the dark living room without pretending. He wasn't angry. Not exactly. Anger would have been easier. What he felt was something more complicated: displacement. As if a structure he'd carefully reinforced had been quietly removed from underneath him. And beneath that was something he didn't want to name. Hurt. Not just because he lost his job. Because Adriana hadn't trusted him enough to fight beside him. The knock came again 2 nights later. Earlier this time. 7:30 p.m. He knew who it was before opening the door. Adriana stood there without the folder this time. No heels, no corporate armor, just a dark coat and exhaustion she wasn't disguising well. "I shouldn't be here," she said. "Then why are you—" She held his gaze. "Because I don't like the way this ended." He stepped aside. She entered slowly, taking in the apartment without comment, the modest couch, the neatly stacked mail, the faint smell of tomato soup. "This is where you retreat," she said quietly. "This is where I live." She nodded. He gestured toward the kitchen table. "You have 5 minutes. Leela's in her room." Adriana sat, hands folded, controlled again. "I reversed the board's decision on the acquisition," she said. He blinked. "When? Yesterday. And they're furious." He waited. "They asked if terminating you solved the issue." "And what did you say?" "That it did." Silence. "I won't bring you back," she continued, voice steady. "Not because you don't deserve it, but because bringing you back would validate every rumor." "You mean about us?" "Yes." He leaned back in his chair. "There is no us." Her eyes flickered. "Isn't there?" The question felt different in his home than it had in her office. He chose his words carefully. "There was professional trust, that's all." "That's not all." He held her gaze. "Then you misread me." The words hit harder than he intended. She absorbed them without flinching. "Did I?" He hesitated. He had felt something, a pull, a recognition, but feelings weren't currency he could afford. "You're my former employer," he said evenly. "And you're still the head of a company that influences my industry. That imbalance doesn't disappear because we're sitting at my kitchen table." Her jaw tightened. "So that's what this is to you. Imbalance? It's reality." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you think I'm incapable of seeing you as an equal?" "I think you've never had to." The words hung between them. She didn't argue. Instead, her voice softened. "I don't have many people who speak to me the way you do. That's not a reason to blur lines. It's a reason to value it." He shook his head slowly. "You valued it until it cost you something." That landed. She looked away briefly, then back. "I made the decision I thought would hurt you least." "You made it alone." "Yes, because you didn't trust me with the fallout." Her composure slipped just enough to reveal something vulnerable. "I trusted you too much." He didn't understand. "You were becoming central," she said quietly, "to decisions, to perspective, to grounding me." "That's not my job, I know." "Then why did you let it happen?" She exhaled slowly. "Because you don't want anything from me." The honesty in that stunned him. "Everyone wants something," he said. "Not from power," she replied. "You challenge it, you don't orbit it." He stood, pacing once across the small kitchen. "This conversation doesn't fix what happened. I'm not trying to fix it." "Then what are you trying to do?" She met his eyes. "I'm trying to understand whether I destroyed something that might have mattered." The vulnerability in her voice made it harder to maintain distance. He spoke carefully. "You didn't destroy it, you clarified it." Her brows knit slightly. "You chose control over partnership." "I chose protection." "From what?" "From being accused of favoritism, from losing authority, from compromising you." "You didn't ask what I was willing to risk." Silence. She looked at him differently then, not as an employee, not even as a potential something else, but as a man who expected to be consulted in his own life. "I'm not used to sharing risk," she admitted. "I know." That was the core of it. Loneliness at the top had trained her to decide alone, to carry consequences alone, to assume that involving others was weakness. He understood that instinct. He lived a version of it too, but understanding didn't excuse it. Footsteps padded softly down the hallway. Both of them turned. Leela stood at the edge of the kitchen, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Daddy," Ethan's body shifted immediately, protective present. "It's okay, Bug, go back to bed." She looked at Adriana curiously. "Is she your boss?" Adriana blinked. "Was," Ethan corrected gently. Leela studied them both with unnerving intuition. "You're not mad," she said to Ethan. He hesitated. "No," she nodded as if that confirmed something for her. "Okay." She disappeared back down the hall. Adriana watched her go, something unreadable in her expression. "She's perceptive," she said quietly. "She has to be." Another silence, then Adriana stood. "I won't come back again unless you ask me to." "That's probably wise," she nodded once. At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth," she said, not turning around, "you were never just an analyst to me." He didn't respond, not because he didn't feel something, but because feeling something wasn't the same as acting on it. She left. This time, he locked the door immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, something unexpected happened. He didn't collapse. He adjusted. He began consulting independently, quietly reaching out to smaller firms that valued discretion over politics. His reputation for integrity traveled slower than rumors, but it traveled. Meanwhile, Vailcrest's stock dipped slightly after the acquisition reversal, but stabilized. Industry blogs speculated about internal conflict. Adriana didn't publicly mention him, and yet one afternoon an envelope arrived in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "You were right about the acquisition's long-term erosion. We renegotiated supplier autonomy clauses because of your projections. I won't pretend this is justice, but it's acknowledgement." He stared at the handwriting for a long time. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an invitation. It was respect, and that complicated everything, because respect was harder to dismiss than emotion. That evening, as he helped Leela with her math homework, he found his thoughts drifting, not to losing the job, but to the conversation at his kitchen table. To the way Adriana had said, "I trusted you too much." Maybe that had been the real imbalance, not power, dependence. He had been careful not to depend on her. But had she begun depending on him? And if so, what responsibility did that create? He didn't have answers, but for the first time since the termination, he didn't feel like the story was finished. It was paused. And pauses, he knew, could either create clarity or widen distance. 3 months passed without another knock on his door. That more than anything unsettled Ethan. He had expected something, another confrontation, a request for quiet advice, an apology wrapped in corporate neutrality. But Adriana kept her distance. No calls, no messages, no indirect outreach through mutual contacts. The silence was deliberate, and it worked. Because silence creates space for interpretation. Ethan's consulting work stabilized faster than he'd anticipated. Smaller logistics firms valued someone who had walked away from a boardroom dispute without public retaliation. To them, it signaled discretion. But discretion came with a price. He was no longer influencing large-scale decisions, no more strategic modeling that shaped national operations, no executive-level forecasting that moved markets. His work now was careful, modest, contained. It paid the bills, but it didn't stretch him. And sometimes, late at night, he admitted something uncomfortable to himself. He missed the challenge. He missed being in a room where decisions carried weight. He missed being needed. That word again. Needed. It was dangerous how easily that feeling intertwined with Adriana. He told himself the connection had always been intellectual, professional respect sharpened by proximity. But memory doesn't operate in bullet points. It operates in moments. The way she used to pause before answering him, considering, not dismissing. The rare, fleeting softness in her voice when she admitted uncertainty. The way she listened when he challenged her. No one else had listened like that in years. And that realization unsettled him more than losing the job. The rupture came unexpectedly. Marcus called one evening, voice tight. "You seen the press release?" "No," Ethan said, frowning. "What release?" "Vailcrest just announced restructuring, large-scale layoffs, departments being consolidated." Ethan's stomach tightened. "That doesn't make sense," he said slowly. "She fought to avoid destabilizing mid-level operations." "Yeah," Marcus replied quietly. "Well, looks like she lost." Ethan opened his laptop. The article was brief but sharp. Vailcrest Dynamics announces strategic workforce realignment following board directives. He scanned quickly. Operational streamlining, cost efficiency measures, executive alignment. It was corporate language again. But beneath it was reality. 200 employees laid off, including Marcus. His phone buzzed again. "She didn't protect us," Marcus said bluntly. "You were right about the acquisition. But now this feels worse." Ethan didn't respond immediately, because something didn't align. Adriana had reversed the acquisition to protect long-term cohesion. Why authorize layoffs that contradicted that philosophy? Unless she didn't authorize them. "Who signed the release?" Ethan asked. "Board chair," Marcus replied, "not her." A cold understanding settled in. Power imbalance doesn't disappear at the top, it just shifts. 2 days later, Adriana's name trended briefly in business circles. Speculation about leadership conflict, rumors of internal tension. Then came the announcement. Adriana Vale would step down as CEO effective immediately. No scandal, no public controversy, just mutual agreement. Ethan stared at the headline longer than he should have. He didn't feel vindicated, he felt something closer to recognition. This was the fallout she had tried to contain alone, and she had lost. He didn't expect to hear from her after that, which is why the email caught him off guard. Subject, no titles. He hesitated before opening it. I won't pretend this is coincidence. The board has wanted consolidation for months. Reversing the acquisition accelerated their timeline. You warned me about structural erosion. I believed I could resist it without cost. I was wrong. I don't need advice, I don't need strategy. I need to say you were right and I didn't know how to fight beside someone instead of in front of them. Adriana. He read it twice, then a third time. There was no ask in it. No invitation, just accountability. That unsettled him more than defensiveness would have, because accountability requires response, and response requires choice. He closed the laptop without replying. The conflict didn't explode outward. It deepened inward. He found himself irritated at small things, impatient with clients who ignored long-term projections in favor of quarterly optics, frustrated by decision-makers who valued optics over impact. It wasn't about them. It was about unfinished conversation, about pride on both sides, about two people who had recognized something real and then retreated because they didn't know how to hold it without imbalance. Leela noticed first. You're thinking too loud, she said one evening while coloring at the table. He blinked. Thinking too loud? You sigh a lot. He almost smiled. Sorry. Are you mad at someone? He considered lying, then didn't. I'm disappointed, he said carefully. In who? Myself. She nodded like that made sense. Then fix it. 7-year-old clarity, if only it were that simple. The actual confrontation happened a week later, not planned, not dramatic. He ran into her at a grocery store. No heels. No boardroom, no glass walls, just fluorescent lighting and a cart half filled with ordinary things, spinach, bread, bottled water. She looked smaller without the architecture of authority around her. He almost walked past. She saw him first. Ethan. His name sounded different without hierarchy attached. Adriana. They stood awkwardly for a moment, two people recalibrating how to exist without titles. You look rested, she said. I sleep more. A small, genuine smile flickered across her face. That's good. Silence again. This one not sharp, just uncertain. How are you? He asked finally. She didn't default to fine. That depends, she said honestly. On the hour. He nodded. Losing control is disorienting. You mean losing position? Yes. Another pause. I read your email, he said. I assumed you did. I didn't respond because I didn't know what response wouldn't reopen something. She held his gaze steadily. Maybe it needs reopening. The vulnerability in that caught him off guard. This isn't about being right, he said. I know. It's about partnership. Yes, you didn't know how, no, and I didn't make it easier. Her brow furrowed slightly. I withdrew instead of confronting it directly, he continued. I framed everything as imbalance instead of asking whether we could redefine it. You were protecting yourself. So were you. They stood there, grocery carts between them like symbolic distance. I've spent years leading from certainty, she said quietly. When I felt uncertainty with you, I mistook it for weakness. It wasn't weakness. I know that now. He studied her carefully. Without the CEO posture, she seemed more human, less guarded, and that made something inside him shift. You don't have to carry everything alone, he said. She let out a soft breath. That's what everyone says. I'm not everyone. Their eyes held. Power imbalance had once defined them. Now, stripped of titles, something else existed, not dependency, not authority, possibility, but possibility requires risk. And risk requires clarity. What are you asking for? He said finally. She didn't hesitate. A conversation without protection strategies. He absorbed that. That means honesty, he replied. Yes, even if it's inconvenient. Yes, he nodded slowly. Not here. A faint smile. No, not here. They agreed on coffee the next afternoon, neutral space, no glass walls, no apartment hallway. Just two adults sitting across from each other without hierarchy. The conversation was not cinematic. No dramatic confessions, no sweeping declarations. It was measured, careful, real. I didn't realize how much I relied on your perspective, she admitted. That's not inherently wrong. It becomes wrong when it's unbalanced, he nodded. I felt responsible for grounding you, he said, and that started to feel like pressure. I never asked you to carry that. You didn't have to, she considered that. I thought distancing was respectful. It felt like rejection. Her eyes softened slightly. That wasn't my intention. I know. Another pause. You matter to me, she said plainly. The words weren't romantic. They were steady. He didn't look away. You matter to me, too. Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't rupture. It was acknowledgement. I don't want to rebuild what we had, she said carefully. That structure was flawed. Agreed. I want something that doesn't rely on titles. That requires patience. I have time. He almost laughed at that. You're not good at patience. I'm learning. He studied her for a long moment. The power imbalance had dissolved structurally, but emotionally it would take effort. You can't look to me for direction, he said gently. Not in the way you did before. I won't. And I can't orbit your ambition. I don't want you to. There it was, boundaries not as walls, as agreements. For the first time, it didn't feel like one protecting from the other. It felt mutual. But healing doesn't erase consequences. And as they stepped cautiously toward something new, neither of them yet understood how deeply pride had already shaped their scars. Because growth requires more than recognition. It requires surrender, and neither of them had fully done that yet. They didn't call it dating. That would have made it feel premature, like a declaration neither of them was ready to defend. Instead, they called it conversations, once a week, sometimes twice, coffee at first, then long walks through quieter parts of the city. Eventually dinners that lasted long enough for the restaurant staff to change shifts around them. Without Veilcrest attached to her name, Adriana was different. Not softer, exactly. More unshielded. She spoke about growing up with a father who believed leadership meant never asking for help. About building a company from a rented office with folding tables and second-hand laptops. About the slow, creeping isolation that comes when people begin filtering themselves around you because your approval carries weight. I thought control was stability, she admitted one night as they walked along the river. But control is exhausting. Ethan understood that instinct intimately. I thought distance was protection, he replied, but distance can become its own kind of fear. They didn't rush physical closeness. There was no dramatic first kiss under streetlights. What built between them was steadier than that. It was the quiet shift from guarded responses to unfiltered ones. The first time she came to his apartment again, it wasn't late at night. It wasn't in crisis. It was Saturday afternoon. Leela answered the door before Ethan could reach it. You're the boss lady, she said matter-of-factly. Adriana blinked, then smiled gently. I used to be. Leela looked past her at the hallway, then back. Are you staying for dinner? Ethan stepped in quickly. Bug, it's okay, Adriana said softly. If it's all right with your dad. Ethan hesitated for half a second. Then nodded. That dinner wasn't elegant. It was pasta from a box and garlic bread slightly overcooked because he got distracted helping Leela with a science project. Adriana didn't comment on the simplicity. She asked Leela about school, listened seriously to a detailed explanation about ecosystems, laughed at the appropriate places without overperforming interest. Later, while washing dishes together, Ethan watched how naturally she had adjusted her tone, firm but not authoritative, warm without trying too hard. You don't have to impress her, he said quietly. I'm not, Adriana replied. I'm just trying to meet her where she is, he studied her. Why? She met his eyes directly. Because if I'm in your life, I don't get to pretend she's not part of it. There was no calculation in that answer, just clarity. Something in his chest loosened. Trust didn't arrive all at once. It built in small tests. He told her when a consulting contract fell through and admitted he felt overlooked in rooms that once would have sought his opinion. Instead of offering solutions, she asked questions. What part of it actually hurt? She said once. Being replaceable, she nodded. That's not about money. No. Do you think you're replaceable? He considered that carefully. In systems, everyone is, he said. As people, no. She reached across the table then, not dramatically, just resting her hand over his for a second. You weren't replaceable, she said quietly. I just didn't know how to hold that without losing authority. The difference now was that she wasn't defending herself. She was owning it. And he wasn't accusing. He was explaining. That shift mattered, but growth isn't linear. The real test came 6 months later. Adriana received an offer to lead a new venture-backed startup in sustainable logistics. Smaller scale, less board interference, significant influence. It would mean rebuilding public authority. It would also mean stepping back into rooms where perception mattered. She told Ethan before responding. "I want your honest reaction," she said. He felt the old tension flicker faintly. Not jealousy, not insecurity, concern. "Do you want it?" he asked. "Yes, for the title." "No, for the control," she shook her head slowly. "For the chance to build differently." He studied her face. "Differently how?" "Collaboratively, transparent leadership structures, shared risk." He didn't smile, but something steadied inside him. "You're not asking for permission." "No, you're asking if it changes us." "Yes," he took a breath. "It will change logistics," he said. "Schedules, media attention, time. And if we're going to do this, it has to be intentional." "I agree." "No secrecy. No protective distance. No unilateral decisions," she added gently. He nodded. That was the surrender part, not sacrificing independence, choosing interdependence. When she accepted the role, media coverage followed. Not explosive, but noticeable. A few business blogs speculated about her past departure from Vailcrest. A couple of commentators revisited the acquisition controversy. One article mentioned Ethan by name as a former strategic advisor. He braced for discomfort, but it didn't come. Because this time she didn't distance herself publicly. In an interview when asked about past leadership challenges, Adriana said calmly, "I learned that strength without shared accountability becomes isolation. Leadership isn't about standing ahead. It's about standing beside the right people." She didn't name him, she didn't need to, he heard it anyway. And this time it didn't feel like burden, it felt like partnership. Leela adjusted gradually. She asked more questions. "Are you her boyfriend?" Ethan nearly choked on his coffee the first time she asked that directly. "I care about her," he said carefully. "That's not what I asked." Adriana, sitting across the table, tried not to laugh. "Yes," Ethan admitted. "I am." Leela considered this with solemn seriousness. "Okay, just don't forget you're my dad first." The statement was clear, not possessive, boundary. Ethan smiled softly. "Always." Adriana nodded in agreement. "I wouldn't want it any other way." Respect. That was the quiet theme threading through everything now. Respect for roles, for individuality, for pace. One evening, nearly a year after the night she'd stood on his doorstep and said, "You're fired." They found themselves back on that same porch. Not in conflict, just standing there after dinner, neither rushing to leave. "It feels strange," Adriana said softly. "This is where I thought I lost you." Ethan leaned against the railing. "You didn't lose me," he said. "I pushed you away. You protected what you understood at the time." She looked at him. "You're not angry anymore." "No." "Why?" He considered the question carefully. "Because I realized something," he said. "You weren't choosing power over me. You were choosing the version of safety you knew. And now you know a different version." She stepped closer, not urgently, just enough that their shoulders brushed. "I don't want to outrun connection anymore," she said quietly. "You don't have to." He kissed her then, not dramatic, not desperate, just certain. Years later, when people asked how they met, the story sounded less dramatic than it had felt. They didn't mention the boardroom tension, or the termination letter, or the months of silence. They spoke about respect, about learning how to disagree without retreating, about the difference between needing someone and choosing them. Vailcrest continued without her. Her new company grew steadily, not explosively, but sustainably. Ethan expanded his consulting into a firm of his own, hiring analysts who valued long-term impact over short-term applause. They didn't merge careers. They didn't blur identities. They stood beside each other. And that was enough. One night long after Leela had gone to bed and the city outside had quieted, Adriana asked him something unexpected. "If I hadn't shown up that night," she said softly, "would you have fought for us?" He thought about it. "I don't know," he admitted. "Why?" "Because I was still protecting myself from wanting something I wasn't sure I could keep." She nodded slowly. "And now I'm not afraid of wanting it." She rested her head against his shoulder. For two people who once mistook control for strength and distance for protection, that was the real resolution. Not fireworks. Not redemption arcs. Just the quiet, steady choice to remain. Together. Share your thoughts below. When pride and protection collide, what would you choose differently? If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing to Prime Black Stories, and thank you for listening.